Hi, hello, everybody. We are live from the Planetary Society headquarters, and I am joined here with Jack, who is our Director of Government Relations, and Asa, our science editor. I am Amber, and I do all sorts of things. We thought that we would do a live where we're all together because we're rarely in the same place and just talk about the current climate as far as politically within the space industry, as well as just cool astronomy things, all of the things. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Hello from Missouri. We are located in Pasadena, California, in case you did not know. So I think the first thing that we have to talk about is something very timely that just happened this morning, which is Jared Isaacman's. How many people have butchered his last name?
If you ever feel bad about not saying his name correctly, there are sitting U.S. senators who said it wrong and then just continued going with saying it wrong.
So if you didn't know, this morning was Isaacman's confirmation hearing in front of the Senate for NASA administrator. And Jack is our space policy expert. So if you have any questions about what happened at that hearing, we can definitely answer those questions here. But let's get your give a little bit of a rundown of what that was that happened, why it's important.
Yeah, so the confirmation hearing, the Commerce Committee, which in the Senate, so each chamber of Congress has, the House and the Senate, have their committees that handle the oversight and have jurisdiction over the various agencies within the federal government. So the Commerce Committee, actually Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee in the Senate, oversees NASA. And so they convened a hearing after 126 days since Jared Isaacman was nominated to be NASA administrator, to give him an opportunity to make his case to the Senate in this public forum. It was alluded to in those meetings and on his social media that he had numerous meetings with members of that committee to talk about his priorities, but this was that opportunity to do so in a public way. And so this is a big step. This is the thing that happens right before the confirmation vote. So every agency head, and sometimes a lot of the underlings within the various agencies of the federal government, have to be confirmed by the Senate. That is a way for the legislative body to have some sort of oversight as to who is in charge of the executive branch. And so this is a huge first step for him. 126 days without any action. Finally, we have action. And so the big topics that came up during this hearing was on the future of NASA, the future of the Artemis program, the future of the International Space Station, all these little things, and the future of the scientific exploration of the cosmos. So it was a really great opportunity for Jared to sort of showcase his experience and his passion and enthusiasm for space, while also taking some pretty pointed questions from members of the Commerce Committee.
I'm so glad that we're doing this today of all days, because I would have wanted to talk to you for like an hour about this any day, and now we get to do it, live in front of our whole community, which is fantastic. So I have so many questions, but I guess first of all, how do you think he fared? Did he seem like, because this is kind of like a job interview a little bit, right? Yep. So how do you think he did overall?
This is what we'll call it the third round job interview.
Okay.
This is the last, really kind of the last chance. Obviously, the Commerce Committee has the jurisdiction and authority to call another confirmation hearing if they really wanted to. I don't think that's happened in the history of the NASA administrator. So the next step is a vote by the committee whether to move forward with his nomination, and then that would lead to a full vote of the Senate.
Okay.
I think Jared did very well. Obviously, Artemis is a big topic, and given the advisors to the president, particularly Elon Musk, who has been critical of the Artemis architecture, has been critical of the International Space Station, has been critical of the way that NASA has been operated previously. There, I think, was a lot of due concern of is this going to be, and I think Chairman Ted Cruz made a really good point, that the problems that befall the space agency often come from these transitionary periods.
Absolutely.
New people come in and they cancel a bunch of the old programs and start a bunch of new ones, only for the next guy to come in and cancel all those programs and start a bunch of new ones. We're talking about things on time, projects that are on time horizons of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? I mean, International Space Station's been going for 25 years. And so in order to protect the longevity of the program, a lot of the questions were geared towards, well, how are you going to keep things not necessarily as they are? I think there's an acceptance that changes will be made, but keeping our focus on returning humans to the moon as a stepping stone to going on to Mars. And I think there was some contentious back and forth between Chairman Cruz and Jared Isaacman on that, and maintaining a American presence in low Earth orbit.
Yeah. Well, so I want to talk more about that, but first there's a timely question in the chat here. Are they still wanting to cut 50% of NASA's funding, and how will that affect space research?
Yeah, talk about how, because this is not in the news really. We reported on it, and there's a reason why we reported on it. It's not because that it was just we made it up. So I want you to kind of talk about that, because Jack is our person in DC in Congress. So he's going
in Congress.
Not
yes,
in
not
Congress.
In, not,
well,
on the ground,
not
face
yet,
the voters.
But he has not done that yet.
Talking to people in Congress.
Yes, he's the person that's on the floor for us in DC. So talk about how we heard about that. What is going on with that? Like, just update us.
So, geez, it's been, I feel like, a whirlwind of the past few months. I'm sure everybody else is feeling that. Changes happening frequently. Very little was known about the priorities of the new administration when it comes to space. There was an expectation that the Trump administration was going to come back into power. It was going to be really good for NASA, because it was really good for NASA 4 years ago. Yeah. Right. That 2017 to 2021 period of time was really good for the space program. That's when Artemis officially kicked off. Yeah. That was the start of a number of large projects, the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope, the beginning of things like Mars sample return, like all started in that period of time. And so it was this sort of understanding that, okay, they're coming back into power. What are their priorities going to be? And then we didn't hear anything for months. And it was early last month, I think, we began hearing rumors in the DC political scene that there was a proposal being discussed that would effectively gut the NASA science programs. So NASA, broken up into mission directorates, the science mission directorate handles all 140 plus flight projects, as well as all the research grants that pertain to space science.
And this is different from the directorate that handles Artemis and human space flight. So that 50% is for science. Obviously, human space flight has some science in it, but specifically like telescopes and all the rovers and all that.
Right, exactly. I like to think of it as like, it doesn't break down exactly like this way, but because there's other mission directorates that also do robotic science, but the science mission directorate is by and large your robotic spacecraft, and then what is now called the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate. That's a mouthful. ESDMD is the main components of Artemis. That's the Space Launch System. That's the Orion Crew Capsule, Gateway Lunar Space Station. All exist within that ESDMD bucket. So the cut that was being proposed is to that Science Mission Directorate. It's about right now $7.3 billion, which is a pretty large number for an individual. It's actually down from the inflation-adjusted peak, which was about $8.6 billion in 2020. So it's been progressive. It just has not been keeping with inflation. There's been massive cuts to individual projects and programs like our sample return. And so, further cuts, it's already a lean program that's barely scraping by. 50% cut it's an extinction level.
So that means like no dragonfly potentially, which I know a lot of people that are science nerds out there are really excited for the octocopter. So is that potential?
I think everything's on the table, unfortunately.
So
we don't know what's in what's called the president's budget
Right.
request. That is the thing that's going to define what their budgetary priorities are and like what programs they might try to cancel or start. That document is not out yet. So I want to be clear, these are rumors of a proposal. When we first started hearing about them, we're like, okay, there's no way that's real. That is insane that they would propose that,
Yeah.
right? That is
Yeah.
essentially surrendering the future of space science to other countries. And that clearly was not the priority for the administration. The last time around certainly won't be the priority this time around. But then it started to gain some traction. We started hearing from more reliable sources closer to the conversation that this is something. And then Eric Berger over at Ars Technica
Right.
reported on it. And Eric's not someone who just throws accusations out there. He
Right.
does his research and has reliable
He's
sources.
extremely well trusted in the
Yeah.
field. Yeah, he knows everyone. And if he reports on it, yeah, you know that there's reality behind it.
Right.
But so I think it's worth taking a second. Even though we don't know what would be prioritized in a 50% budget cut to NASA science, to this mission directorate, I think it's worth going through what that could look like a little bit, because I mean, cutting half of anything is a lot, right? But okay, so maybe it means no Dragonfly. Maybe it means shutting down existing missions. Maybe it means shutting down existing observatory. Like, can we just maybe walk through some thought experiments?
Well,
what were some possibilities here?
So the budget crunch that we're currently experiencing, right? Just that slide of about $1 billion, almost $1.5 billion since fiscal year 2020. Yeah. Just from that, we're already talking about decommissioning Hubble and Chandra, which notably Jared Isaacman has been a pretty vocal advocate for both of those missions, even offering to boost Hubble's orbit. Part of the problem with Hubble is that it can't stay in orbit for much longer. But Hubble, Chandra, you got the Voyagers still flying, still doing incredible science. You have existing missions that are in extended operation. New Horizons, the spacecraft that flew by Pluto right over here 10 years ago. You have Juno operating around Jupiter. All these missions, right, that are still beaming down amazing science, revolutionary science about these distant worlds. They might be on the chopping block. And then, missions in development. I would probably say Dragonfly, of the missions in development, Dragonfly's probably the safest because it's gone through what's called confirmation or key decision point C. So basically, it's gone from being just a concept, they have the plan, to they're actually starting to bend metal. Yeah. Once you start doing that, once you start investing in that level of commitment, it's very hard to cancel it. But it could be, right? I mean, depending on how extensive these cuts are. But missions like Veritas and Da Vinci, which are still in the formulation process, probably going to be delayed even further. Those were missions that were supposed to launch next year in 2026, and now 2030, 2031 at the earliest. These are already, and this is in the current budget environment. We've delayed new missions extensively. In an environment where 50% of the budget's cut, I think all these things are on the table.
And don't forget, if you have any questions for Jack about space politics in general, it doesn't have to be specifically about this 50% cut or about Jared Isaacman. Feel free to drop them in the chat. Jack, I want you to, you mentioned some of the things that Jared plans on keeping strong if he were to be confirmed as NASA administrator. And you mentioned two things. One, keeping the Artemis architecture. And you might hear architecture, and it's if you don't know what that means, it's basically just all of the mission steps of something. So it's that includes SLS. And so, there's a lot of things buzzing about no longer using SLS and therefore no longer using Orion, which is a spacecraft attached to the SLS. But he mentioned keeping that going for a short term. Can you talk about that? And he also talked about keeping a lot of, being an advocate for NASA science, which is good. These are good things.
Yeah. Yeah, on the first point, he mentioned he got a pretty pointed question from some of the members, from multiple members. It wasn't just the folks representing, Texas with Chairman Cruz, but it was other folks within the Commerce Committee, Democrats and Republicans, asking, what is the best way to get humans back to the moon? They see it as this geopolitical contest with China to get humans back on the moon. This is a huge motivating factor for a lot of those folks. And he got asked the pointed question of, like, is the current architecture good enough to get us back to the moon? And he said yes. He said in the short term, which I'm taking to mean Artemis 2, which is flying next year, doing a sort of Apollo 8 style, hopefully next year, doing it. And I will also note the Artemis 2 astronauts were in the room for the confirmation.
Oh, wow.
So doing that loop around the moon to prove out the Orion capsule is ready for a crewed landing. And then Artemis 3, which is that landing. And so that's what I'm choosing to believe is what he meant by in the short term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He added the caveat that in the long term, this architecture is not necessarily sustainable, which I think has always been part of the conversation of eventually, once we redevelop these capabilities to get back to the lunar surface with crew, there is going to need to be a investment in new infrastructure there on the lunar surface, in cislunar space, the area around the moon, and getting to and from Earth to the moon. Now, on Earth science and science in general, he made sure to point out, he got a pretty pointed question from Senator Markey from Massachusetts about the administration sort of scrubbing NASA's website for publicly available data sets related to Earth science. And Jared Isaacman made it clear. He says, I'm a supporter of the Earth Science Division. I'm a supporter of science in general. And this is something that is truly unique to NASA. And that's, I think, the thing that I really hung on there was the fact that he's not coming in there, as I think some people feared, and says, oh, well, let's just commercialize all of it. Some industry will, if we cut all the funding for this, some industry will just pick it up, which is simply not the case.
Correct.
These are unique capabilities of the government. There is no intrinsic commercial benefit, though you can argue spin-off technologies and development of core capabilities for a given contractor. But in actually doing scientific data collection, there is no marketplace for that. You can't go to Home Depot and buy a Mars rover.
Right.
These are highly specialized people that build these things, highly specialized instruments that ride on these things.
Right.
Only the government is capable of having that long-term view, 10 plus years to operate, to build, or to design, build, and operate these things. And is the only one that has the financial capital to do so as well. And that's, that balance of commercial's good at some things, buy what you can from commercial, but build what you must, build what only NASA can do. And I think he really leaned into that message.
Yeah. So despite belief, private industry, commercial industry isn't going to swoop in and just do everything that NASA does. That's not how it works right now. There's no ROI for for Perseverance samples. So you were going to say something, Lisa.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's all fantastic to hear about Isaacman, right? Like, it seems like, to me, like he said pretty much all the right things. He was seemed like a staunch supporter for science, and, understood sort of what the political climate is going around, and, didn't say anything that any congressperson would really hate to hear, but also seemed like they would be on the side of the things we care about as the Planetary Society. So what I'm wondering is, why was he nominated if he seems to be almost in contrast to these other rumors coming out of the executive branch?
Well, hopefully it's because those are just rumors, right? Hopefully we have to say, oh, that wasn't the case.
That'd be lovely.
Would love to issue a mea culpa, right? But the thing is I think he was nominated because he definitely comes with that outsider experience, right? Dropped out of high school at age 16, started a payment processing company, became a billionaire out of his parents' basement, and owns and operates the largest private air force in the world. Like,
oh my God,
he has all of these amazing credentials behind him. And so he's a very accomplished person, who then also, not to mention all those things, but then he procured and flew 2 space flights. The first being Inspiration 4, and the one which was last year, Polaris Dawn, which flew humans further than they have gone since 1972. So it is truly, he has, I think, encapsulates a lot of that, like, manifest destiny, sort of, a great American story that seems to emanate from the president's rhetoric, and the rhetoric of the administration right now. How that rubber meets the road of budgetary realities is what we're going to be very curious to watch.
Absolutely. Do you think, if you had to give odds right now, do you think he will be confirmed?
I think he is a shoo-in to be confirmed. He has a lot of Democrats supporting him. And I think at a time of stark partisan divide, any win for bipartisanship is
absolutely
great. And space is truly a nonpartisan area. Everyone's got a different reason for doing this. You have 535 members of Congress. I like to say you have 535 reasons to support space, at least. And, I think Jared in part exemplifies that, right? He exemplifies that you can have a background like he has, dropping out of high school, putting himself out there and becoming an entrepreneur, and then going back to school and like really exemplifying a very unique American story that isn't so unique from a lot of people out there. So it truly is, I think he brings a lot of people together in the same way that NASA does. Now, I think there are certainly it's not going to be 100-0 vote in the U.S. Senate, but I think he's going to fare probably a lot better than some of the more contentious nominees.
I want to get to some of these questions. So Robert asked, is the privatization of aerospace tech / Artemis research a departure from UN common heritage? Are you when you say UN common heritage?
Does it mean the Outer Space Treaty? Maybe?
No, the Artemis Accords. Are you referring to the Artemis Accords? We can talk a little bit about what the Artemis Accords are. If you want to dive into that, we won't go too deep into.
No, he elaborates in the context of people putting a patent on something like zero gravity in the manufacturing process. That's a specific question.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
The 1979 Space Treaty, okay.
Which 1979 Space Treaty?
Isn't that not the main outer space treaty, but then the Moon Treaty that was not ratified? Am I wrong?
I think that's Moon. Yeah, Moon Treaty was not ratified, at least not by the U.S. or the Soviet Union at the time. Soviet Union, now Russian Federation. That's a very good question. It's not I'll say this. I think there's a lot of talk around the new space, capital space. Movement that approaches space exploration as if it's unique what they're proposing, right? That there is a commercial interest in supporting government-run programs. That's been the way we've been doing things for a long time. Lockheed Martin, previously Martin Marietta, Boeing, previously McDonnell Douglas, like all of these organizations have been built up in the past to support government functions and to help diffuse the costs. But there hasn't been those direct commercial benefits. I guess, when you're Boeing and you're building or helping to build the space shuttle, you're not then also offering rides on that to private astronauts. So there is a little bit of a difference in the sort of type of contracting that we're doing, but it's not to say that everything up until this point has been all government and no commercial industry has been involved. It's actually been pretty rich in commercial involvement. It's just the business model for a lot of these companies has shifted over time. And so, SpaceX and Intuitive Machines, and Firefly and Blue Origin are kind of banking on there being other customers besides the government that will take advantage of their activities and their capabilities. mean, as it stands, look at the Firefly lander that landed on the moon
Absolutely.
just last month.
Yeah.
Most of the payloads on that were NASA funded. So even when there is a commercial entity proving out their ability to do these things, we are so early in this new market, as it's sort of being defined, that we have not proven out that there is a commercial use case for some of these things. And that this is the risk that NASA is taking in going with a sort of disaggregated, commercialized model, as opposed to what we had done in the past, which was very directed, very centralized, but still leveraged sort of the industrial base and commercial companies.
Well, in that sense, it's kind of deeply ironic, right? Because NASA started to shift toward this to become more efficient in the ways that people often criticize the government for being, and saying, oh, well, a company could do this better. NASA is working with companies for partially that reason. And then as soon as it does that, people say, well, why don't we just have companies do the whole thing? When there's clearly so much that only NASA can do. I want to mention, we have a question in chat here, which I really like. This person says they're 39 years old and they're most excited by the Voyager missions. Will I still be alive by the time we get more sophisticated probes into interstellar space?
And I will say, feel free to drop any astronomy, astrophysics, planetary science questions in the chat. We're actually going to shift, so Jack doesn't have to sit here all day, with Sarah, who's planetary radio host. We'll talk a little bit more about space science and just fun questions. So feel free to drop them in there. We're monitoring the chat, and we'll get to them later, but we can definitely talk about the Voyager missions right now. And what do you think about whether or not we get more sophisticated probes into interstellar space based on funding?
Well, it's not just us now, though, right? I mean, China has put pen to paper. We'll see what that actually comes down to. But they said they're going to launch an interstellar mission that will exit the solar system.
I will say, when China says, when their national space agency says they're going to do things, they tend to do them on time. And
that must be nice.
I know, on time.
That sounds nice.
Yeah. Now, I will say that there's probably, we don't know a lot about the system of governance within the China National Space Agency. And so I am sure it is as cutthroat as it is here in the US, but we just don't get to see that part of it. But when they make an announcement, like the recent announcement was that last week or a week before that, about their astrobiology strategy that included missions to the outer solar system. It's them putting pen to paper is very significant in the grand scheme of things. And they've committed to returning to the moon, returning humans to the moon, and building up a lunar infrastructure, doing a Mars sample return and Venus atmospheric sample return program. These are all things that I think they are fully committed to. But for U.S. interstellar missions, so a lot of that is actually going to be housed within the heliophysics. So Voyager, the way that NASA organizes their missions has changed a lot over time. It used to just be called solar system science. It was this very broad, it included heliophysics and astrophysics, all this other stuff. It's now been broken up into basically discipline-specific divisions. And so anything involving interstellar space, the interstellar medium, interactions between our solar system and other systems around us, probably going to fall more into that heliophysics program there. But I know within the heliophysics division, there has been a lot of talk. IMAP, it stands for something. We love acronyms in NASA and space. But IMAP is a good example of another interstellar mission. There's other missions sort of in formulation or even pre-formulation, right? Ideas for things. I know one of our founders, Lou Friedman, talks about, building a telescope that goes into interstellar space to use the solar gravity lens of our star to directly image.
That's my dream. Yeah.
Such a cool concept, right? Yeah. So there is talk of it. Government functions on timescales of 10, 15, 20 years. So an idea today might not become a reality for another 15 years, but it's got to start somewhere, right? And it does also start with funding. And if you don't have that allocation from the Congress, from the administration, to pursue these cutting edge, groundbreaking scientific discoveries, it won't happen anyway. But it's important to be talking about it now and to be advocating for the funding, which is my whole role.
Yeah.
And our whole, kind of shtick here at the Planetary Society is advocating for that funding.
And isn't it true that of all of the divisions, the science divisions, heliophysics is the one that seems best positioned going into this new administration, that their funding is looking a little bit sunnier compared to other things? Did
you even know?
Oh, I didn't mean to do that.
Actually, they've had a really rough go at it recently.
Oh, no.
So
okay.
their big project, the Geospace Dynamics Constellation (GDC), was canceled. I think they attempted canceling it twice under the Biden administration. It's kind of sitting in limbo. We're under a continuing resolution for our funding for the whole of fiscal year 2025, which runs out at the end of September this year. That means no programs can get canceled, but no new programs can start. And so it's sort of sitting in this limbo area. They certainly do not have the budget to maintain progress on GDC as well as the number of flight projects, which I will say Voyager is a heliophysics mission.
Yeah.
It was moved over from planetary science to heliophysics.
I didn't know you could move them like that. I guess
you can't. I mean, it requires
it's like
some.
You can just rename it
wherever he fits.
Right.
Great. Well, I think that a lot of the questions coming in, they're really great. I think we can start to transition into our science talk. But before we do, someone mentioned Europa Clipper. And I just want to talk a little bit about how the advocacy here at the Planetary Society helped to enable the fact that Europa Clipper saw daylight. If it's in space, is it? I mean, it sees light, but it's not day. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Europa Clipper and what the Planetary Society did to help enable that mission.
Yeah. So I will say, if you are worried about this 50% cut proposal, if it even comes to become a real proposal, just know that the president's budget request is just that, a request. Because Europa Clipper began its life, at least the current iteration of it, in 2014, when the Obama administration said, we are not funding a mission to Europa in their fiscal year 2014 budget request. And lo and behold, Planetary Society members from across the country showed up. I think 360,000 letters were sent. Visits to Congress were had. The Planetary Science Caucus got kicked off. I mean, the advocacy, the sheer just response to that moment to say, no, we want to be looking for life elsewhere in the solar system. We want this mission to Europa. Got it over the finish line. It got it into the budget in that fiscal year. And in every fiscal year since, despite multiple efforts from the administration and folks within that Office of Management and Budget, the people pinching pennies over there on Pennsylvania Avenue, to try to get rid of this program, they couldn't withstand the just grassroots advocacy from groups like the Planetary Society, who really led on that effort.
I love it. And so if you see the president's budget request and you freak out, just know that Jack's already on the ground running. He's writing all the letters. He's writing everything to ensure that we see space science flourish for years to come. And we protect those missions that we care about. And the Planetary Society is literally powered by the people. So it's everyday people that just write letters. Letters work. I know it's crazy to be like, Trump is not going to read this. The Senate isn't going to read this. It makes a difference.
But they do, because everybody thinks that they don't. And so, I am having worked on the Hill, having worked with people on the Hill, you'd be kind of surprised at how little you hear from your constituents sometimes. And so I think it's incredibly important if you care about this, to write that letter to your member of Congress and to your senators, because if you don't, nobody else will.
Yeah.
And so if you're feeling down and depressed and you feel like you can't do anything, look to the people who are doing something.
Yeah.
And in this case, for space science and space exploration, That's the Planetary Society.
And if you're a little bit more extroverted, you can always join us for our Day of Action. This year we had 110 people.
110 people from 26 states and DC. It was the largest one we've done yet.
And Jack organizes meetings for you and does all kinds of great stuff in order for you to go to Capitol Hill and be able to advocate for space science yourself. But if you're an introvert, just send a letter. So, okay, great. So let's transition now. Jack, Director of Government Relations, thank you so much for joining us. Now we're going to talk about some cool space stuff. And we'll have Jack back when we're all together, which we don't know when that will happen. But thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Asa. This was great.
Of course.
Yes. Okay, so now we're going to bring on Sarah, who you might have heard literally because she's in the radio. She is our planetary radio host, and she is also, would you define yourself as an astrophysicist or an astronomer?
I mean, I guess I could qualify myself as an astrophysicist because I got the degree. But
Yeah.
I mean, we all start as astronomers staring up at the sky, and
Yeah.
I just added a little math to it.
Yeah, I'm always a little bit iffy like that because I wouldn't consider myself an astrophysicist. I would more consider my journey as astronomer and planetary scientist, and I would not consider myself an astrophysicist. So I always just wonder about that. So I want to get to these questions. Oh, and Ace is also.
He got the full doctorate.
He got the
okay.
full doctorate. So I actually resonate with Jared Isaacman's story, but that's a time for another talk.
We already had a bunch of good questions in the chat.
Yeah, I want to
about
get to
astronomy.
them. You want to get to the first one?
Yeah, well, so I think there's one that I know always gets us excited to talk about. Someone asked, could there be a telescope on the far side of the moon by 2050?
This is actually great
Ooh.
because you just covered something that NASA does. What is it? NASA Innovation.
Yeah, NASA's Innovative Advanced Concepts program is the one where basically people suggest these really cool ideas that might be a little far-flung, a little out there, but NASA provides grant money for these kinds of things. And then sometimes they go all the way to phase 3 and then they get built. And in the last few years, I've talked to a lot of people that are working on lunar far side projects.
Yeah.
And it's not like we want to send people to the far side of the moon and build them ourselves. The idea is basically that they want to send a bunch of autonomous robots, essentially, to use in situ resources, use the actual stuff on the moon to fabricate telescope arrays on the far side of the moon without anybody there to do it.
That's so cool. I mean, I'm just a little bit sad about that because I would love to go there and do that job where I work at that observatory, but I guess I wasn't going to do that anyway, so it's fine if robots do it.
Yeah,
but think of the science.
Plus the scale of something you could build on the moon with that kind of technology.
True.
Right? And if any part of this array kind of breaks, you could always rebuild it. Or, there's so many interesting applications for this, but they've suggested some really interesting things. There's, that's one concept. There's ways of building fluidic telescopes that could allow us to see
Have
things.
you guys heard of this?
Oh my
Fluidic
gosh.
telescope.
I love this one.
I love it too.
The reason I know so much about these NIAC program concepts is because I get to host the webcast for NASA's Innovative Advanced Concept Symposium every year.
Which is free on YouTube if you guys ever want to tune in next year.
Yeah, and it's free to go
so
in person too. It kind of bounces around between areas that are near NASA facilities. So, we got lucky this year. It was literally one block that way, but the year before that it was in Houston. But the fluidic telescope concept, I've seen the people there for 2 years. They call it Flute. And essentially, you kind of build the structure for it, but then you just kind of allow the fluid to form a kind of, telescope surface. And they went through all kinds of different concepts using surface tension to keep it all together. And they were like, do we let it freeze in space or do we keep it a fluid?
Yeah.
There's all different kinds of ways you could do that. But in the end, it turned out that freezing it didn't really work super well because then you're kind of freezing a structure of crystal into it that actually warps the image. So keeping it fluidic
makes sense.
made more sense. But then how do you keep something fluid at that temperature? It's wild.
So to be clear, the advantage of the fluid telescope is that it's really expensive and impractical to make very large mirrors. But the larger your mirror, the more light you collect, the more you can see in space. The more sensitive, the deeper and more easily you can get amazing observations and discover new things. And so building a giant mirror is hard, but if you can just sort of pour a liquid into it, and then keep it nice and smooth. And not only is it easy to build, but it kind of is almost like self-repairing, right? Because say like a micrometeorite hits it,
Doesn't even matter.
It just plops in.
And you just keep a little extra fluid on there. So if there's anything that dissipates or, like cosmic rays and stuff from the sun will blow off pieces. So as long as you account for that, you're fine. But I think also one of the
Sorry, I just imagine like a giant bubble. Like what is it called? To blow the bubbles? The little
a wand?
Yeah. So we just have bubble wands of just like fluidic telescope debris out in space, and some other civilization is looking at it and it's like, I think they have bubbles.
Is that a bubble wand?
Are those giant bubbles?
Right, but there's so many challenges to building a big mirror, and I feel like the mirror itself isn't even the challenge. The real problem is how do you fit it inside of our rockets? Like we saw that with JWST,
totally.
right? They had to basically origami that thing in such a way that it created a massive amounts of points of failure. Yeah. And luckily it all unfolded in space, but like I was holding my breath for 2 weeks.
Totally.
Just like, what if one little thing doesn't go right? And all of that was because we had to fit this giant telescope inside this tiny little rocket, right? But if it's made of fluid and some struts, that's not a problem.
So I got to ask, having covered this now for years, what is the coolest proposal you've seen for like one of these innovative space exploration or astronomy discoveries? Which one's like, you're in the background, you're like, I really hope that happens.
Yeah, and controversial because it doesn't actually have to do anything with building something that allows you to learn more. It was more about sustaining people in space. The mobile astropharmacy concept that Len Rothschild suggested. That one blew my mind because, I mean, essentially, like right now we have a system where if you're in space, you're close enough, you're on the ISS or something, we can send you medicine or bring you home if you're super sick. But it's still a challenge, right? You saw it in the case of that Boeing capsule recently. Sometimes it takes a little extra planning to get people back from space. Still figured it out, but
it took 9 months.
It took a while. Say you get really sick, but you're on the moon.
Yeah.
Or you're really sick and you're on the way to Mars. Or you encounter something that we couldn't plan for, right? Like there's only so many medications you can put inside of your spacecraft. So the concept was essentially you create microorganisms that can manufacture these medicines, and you kind of put them in a quiet state. You dry them up, you put them on little slides essentially, and you can just make a slide deck of almost every medication you can possibly think of. And then you just manufacture it in space using these microorganisms. And what I love about that is not just that it would allow people to survive better in space, but think about the practical applications here on Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
There are so many medications that like it's just not economical to make a huge supply of them, but you need that for people.
Right. And also it's not only the fact that you can manufacture it in space, medication has its shelf life.
Yes.
So not only that, but you have cosmic rays and you have all of this radiation that's completely like compounding we have radiation shielding, but how strong it will be for a Martian trip there and back is debatable, but it's going to protect hopefully that medication and make sure that it lasts long enough. So to be able to just take out a couple microorganisms, be like, build whatever you need to right there, that is just
so cool,
mind-blowing.
But really though, I could talk for like hours about the strange concepts there. They're so cool, and not all of them come to fruition, but they're so creative. Like who doesn't want to see a plane on Mars or some kind of adapter you put onto your water tanks to test for extant life on Mars? Like there's so much there.
I feel like every time I read one of these concepts, it sounds like Star Trek technology or whatever. Yeah. And I feel like this is part of why people so often equate the two, like the forefront of space exploration and its technologies can at any point sort of just give way to like the actual future and these things that we envision as sci-fi, like, I don't know, that mobile pharmacy type thing sounds only a few steps away from like the thing the doctor uses on board, like one of the USS Enterprise or whatever,
scan.
Or just like inject. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I want to bring it back to the telescope really quick because they asked whether or not we can, there's two questions here. One, we talked about it, but we actually didn't talk about it. Like why would we want a telescope on the far side of the moon? Not the dark side of the moon, far side of the moon. And also, could we get it done by 2050? 2050. To be clear, there's no. What phase is it in? Do you remember the telescope?
It's going on to phase. I know it was in phase 2.
Yeah.
I'm not sure yet if it made it to phase 3 because they're still announcing.
Yeah. So they have to be in order to become a confirmed mission, it is extraordinarily rigorous process.
Yeah.
So it has to be confirmed even as a mission, and then even if it gets confirmed, your budget might get cut. And so there's all of these things that go, and that's why these things take so long. So there's nothing right now, from my understanding, that's in the process that there will be a telescope by 2050. Like, we can't say that.
I feel like if I had to bet, I would say 2050 is pretty soon.
And then they have to build it.
But I mean, a telescope doesn't have to be like a big honking radio telescope. It could just be something relatively small and dinky. And that would kind of technically count. But for
that's its name.
Small and dinky.
Just dinky.
I think it's called Far Side.
Yeah, I know. I always think of that. Dinky is in my brain is the Dinkinesh, exactly, the asteroid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
But I think for the full size one, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but this would be built in a crater, right? To use it as a natural dish.
Yeah, some are designed that way.
Okay,
some are just, across the surface. But I do like that the dish structure of a crater would be helpful.
Natural Death Star vibes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we're all into that. But
we're not. Don't start throwing that out on the internet. We're the good guys.
It receives information and light. It doesn't send it out. Don't worry. But I feel like, definitely once we begin to have infrastructure and research bases on the moon, which is coming, sooner or later it's coming this century, then this will be one of the first things I think we get in terms of astronomy, in terms of science there, because the advantages, how many astronomers dream about this, but when they go to bed at night and they wake up, or go to bed at 6 a.m. and wake up at 11 p.m.
The reason why we want a telescope on the far side of the moon is, I'm assuming it's a radio telescope, right?
Yeah, in most cases.
It is radio silent. And do one of you guys want to touch on why it's radio silent? I can kind of
Well, I mean, it's the same reason why we put the James Webb Space Telescope in space where it is, right? We didn't put it in a place where it can see the sun or get beamed by the Earth, right? We put it in a place where it's beyond the moon, so it can block all that stuff coming off of Earth, because unfortunately and fortunately, humans are really loud.
Yeah.
And all of those signals we're sending into space
are radio
mostly. In the case of JWST, it's mostly, partially that. There's some infrared stuff.
Yeah.
You can kind of widen out the amount of light that these telescopes are picking up to hopefully avoid where humans are loudest. But there's a lot of radio astronomy we want to be doing, and we can't be having the Earth interfere with that. Even, in one of the projects that we've been grant funding through our STEP grant program, our Science and Technology Empowered by the Public program, we've funded this program that helps, basically we're trying to help find technosignatures in space. But the main thing that project does isn't even combing through the actual data for alien signals, if they exist, which we don't know. It's literally just deleting human noise out of these signals using citizen science, because humans are just that loud.
I want to talk about what technosignatures is for anybody that might not know. There are certain signatures that we're looking for within the universe that could tell us whether it could be a hint of an alien civilization or alien life. One of them is biosignatures, and these are biological signs out in exoplanets, atmospheres, all these different things that are basically clues of whether or not there could be life there. And then there's technosignatures, and these are things like a certain type of radio wave or lights or something that could tell us that an alien civilization has technology. And so when we talk technosignatures, that's what that means.
Yeah, any amount of detection of life in the universe would be the greatest discovery in the history of history. But let's face it, we're not going to react the same way when we find microbes in Enceladus versus, fully communicating intelligent creatures in the universe. So it's worthwhile doing both of these kinds of science, even though we're far more likely to find microorganisms and probably close to us. There's a lot of ocean moons that we're exploring that have really great potential for life.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, I want to ask you, because your literal day-to-day job is talking to the scientists who are doing this search and who are running the missions that are exploring the solar system and beyond. Have you had any, I don't know, particular highlights in the past year, people you've talked to, or moments where you're like, wow, I didn't know that. This is incredible. I mean,
yeah, and it's one of those things where I've done almost 130 shows at this point. So it all blends together. But the last few months, I've felt really, really excited about the guests that I've had on. My first guest of the year was Bill Nye, the science guy, who I
hear he's cool.
He's cool. No,
he's all right.
He's our CEO, so we work with him, but I've never had an opportunity to interview him, right? So that was a really great way to kick off the year and to celebrate our 45th anniversary, which is, something we all celebrated at our Cosmic Shores Gala this last weekend together, which is part of why we're all in the office together.
Yeah.
That was really fun. I got to talk to two women that I was really excited to talk to. Emily Calandrelli, who people know as a space gal. She became the 100th woman to go to space. So I got to interview her about that experience. And that was really moving for me, hearing her stories, but also the reactions of her family and her children and what it was like to look down at the Earth. That was beautiful. And another person who went to space I really wanted to talk to was Haley Arsenault, who was in that meeting with that confirmation hearing with Jared Isaacman earlier today, because she was one of the first crew members that he went to space with on Inspiration 4. And she was a pediatric cancer survivor who then became someone who worked at St. Jude, the hospital that saved her life as a kid. And because she was just, really excited and a part of that, when Jared Isaacman went to space, he wanted to create this crowdfunding opportunity to send money to St. Jude. So they came to her like, hey, you want to go to space? And not just that, you want to be the first person with a prosthetic limb in space. Yeah. That was really cool, not just because of, I'm so happy for her in the arc of her life, but think about the accessibility thing there, right? No one has gone to space with a prosthetic limb. So there were these moments where she was going through, gravity, G-force testing. She had to go to her doctor and be like, hey, is this going to mess up my prosthetic leg? And they're like, well, we don't know. No one has ever done this before.
Right.
Yeah. Her journey was beautiful.
And if you want to hear more of these stories that Sarah's talking about in the extended version, then I encourage you to look on our YouTube. All of Sarah's Planetary Radio episodes are on there. So if you want to look these up, they're in full glory.
Yeah, I do want to mention one though. I know I could go on forever, but
totally.
I've talked mostly about human experiences there, but on the science side, one of the interviews I really loved earlier this year was with Adine Denton. She was talking about the formation of Pluto and its moon Charon, its largest moon, Charon, or Karen, depending on how you like to pronounce it.
I'm a Karen guy.
Yeah.
You would be a Karen.
I like saying Sharon because the person who discovered Pluto, his wife's name was like Charlene or something. He named that moon that in part because he liked that it was close to her name. So
that's hard to argue with.
But you're correct in that it probably should be Karen, but it's really a matter of interpretation. But I loved that one because that story essentially was that a large object came in and hit Pluto, but because of the way that they impacted each other, there was a moment where Pluto and Charon were literally connected to each other. They became one body before they then re-separated and formed this really close, very tidally locked system. And I've always thought that Pluto and Charon were kind of like the most romantic objects in the solar system because they're literally they're tidally locked to each other, just dancing in space. And Pluto has this beautiful little heart on it. Last year, I got to do an interview about the formation of the heart with Adine, which is how I learned about this Charon story. And it was so cool to hear all those details and what it means for the history of Pluto and its internal possible liquid water ocean. And I'm learning so much. I say I got the degree in astrophysics, but I tell you, doing this job and just talking to the scientists doing the work, I've learned more in the last 2.5 years than I feel like I learned in school, just talking to people.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay. I know that there was a question here. And I wanted to shout out Dusty Bottoms. I don't know if that's your real name. If it is, awesome.
Zooniverse.
Who has been, someone else shouted out Zooniverse, but Dusty mentioned, okay, that he is, hopefully it has been a member for over 20 years
Wow.
and is always happy. Confirmed he is he. And always happy to spread the PB&J. What he's talking about is something that Bill, one of his many taglines, which is PB&J, I forgot.
Don't tell her. Just let her think about it.
Beauty and joy. I know it's that. Just the peanut butter, peanuts, beauty and joy. Why can't I remember what it's called? Bill's gonna kill me. Passion. Thank you.
Oh, you ruined
You got
it.
it.
She was never gonna get it.
We've had a long day.
don't
Okay,
because the
be
planet-
kind to us.
The
We've been
planet's
in
beauty.
it for a while.
Yeah,
The
it's true.
peanut.
The
I'm
planet's
sorry,
beauty and joy. No, I
Passion.
actually added that to my outro on the show because it gets said so often.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've like usurped his really cool phrase.
Yeah.
You know, but
He has so many phrases. So to me, it's forever peanuts, beauty, and joy. Thank you, peanut butter and joy. There are several people struggling to remember, so thank you for validating my memory. I appreciate that. Did you see another question
There's
that
been-
you wanted?
There's been
There's
a bunch.
lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the space station one.
Yeah, yes.
That was one of the first ones that we haven't got to.
Totally. I know we're almost at an hour, so maybe just a couple more and then wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
yeah, but also straight up, if you have questions that you want answered either by us or you want me to bring someone on the show to answer that question, email me. Just email me at planetaryradio@planetary.org. We might not be able to answer every single question, but I love hearing from people because sometimes people come up with concepts for episodes that I wouldn't have, and then I
Yeah.
get to go on a whole
Totally.
adventure figuring out the
Can you
answer.
say that email again slower, just in case someone does want to
Totally.
say something?
It's planetaryradio@planetary.org, or I think radio@planetary.org works too.
Okay, so if you do
Yeah.
have questions, feel free to email. Space stations. We'll do that one, then we'll do one more, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Someone asked whether, well, there were a couple different ones. Like maybe we can pick and choose which one we want to talk about. Someone asked about the likelihood of having an interstellar space station within, I don't know, the near future-ish, I guess. And then also someone was asking whether there were any plans, maybe in this sort of the innovative concept sort of framework, to develop a space station with its own artificial gravity.
Yeah. So yeah. No on the first one.
Yeah.
But yes on the second one. For the first one, for space station, I think the question was whether or not there are plans to put space stations around another solar system in the future.
If
So
only.
space is a really big. And our closest star is part of a binary star system, and it is 4 light years away, which is 186,000 miles. That's the speed of light, and times a lot is a lot. So it's just really far.
It's really, really far.
And we are the farthest thing that we have out there. Is it Voyager 1 or Voyager 2? Do you know which one's beating? I want to say it's Voyager 1.
I want to say it's Voyager 1.
Yeah, so it's really hard to put things out on another solar system. But what we are doing is the ISS will likely be decommissioned in 2030.
Yeah.
And then from there, what NASA's planning to do is basically contract the work that they're doing on the ISS, because the ISS is our orbiting space lab. It's our science lab up in space, and contracting that out to private companies. So there's quite a few different space station concepts. Sierra Space has one, which is an inflatable habitat. We have Axiom.
Yeah.
Axiom is actually going to go up, and it's going to take some of the modules from the ISS and attach it to their own space station. There's
Voyager, right?
Voyager.
And Voyager is supposed to be a circular configuration that would have artificial gravity, right?
Yes. So they have a couple concepts, and one of them will eventually test artificial gravity. But it's not the cylindrical space station that, what's his name? What is the author that basically?
Which one? Hyman?
Nope.
Asimov?
Nope.
Arthur C. Clarke.
Nope. It's Gerald O'Neill.
O'Neill.
Gerald O'Neill is if you want to look at cylindrical artificial gravity space stations. Gerald O'Neill is basically the king of the one that started, sketching those out. But yes, so Voyager is one of them, and there's one other big one that is doing space station that is partnering with Hilton.
The one that's making Janeway Station, that one?
Yes.
It's called Janeway Station.
I get them confused between the Hilton and the Space Marriott. There's two
What?
competing plans, I believe, but Janeway Station I always remember because Kate Mulgrew, who played Captain Janeway on Star Trek, said something about it on at the time it was Twitter, now X, about being like, they better send me up there.
So these new space stations are going to be hopefully launched once they're confirmed soon. Like 2030 is coming up fast.
Yeah,
and
so
so
we gotta design the new lunar gateway if there is funding for that.
Yeah. So Lunar Gateway is going to be the space station orbiting the moon, which is part of the Artemis program, and it's going to be kind of like they stay here and they go to the moon. They go back up and then they go to the moon and then they come back to Earth. And so, so there are lots of plans for different types of space stations. It's just going to be so different. It's going to be so, like, the ISS has been this kind of pinnacle of, you just see images of the Americans and the, Soviet Union shaking hands at the, there was all this. It was a great place for international, just to bring nations together. And it's going to be sort of weird that there's not going to be one place that happens on.
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently, reflecting on it, because what the International Space Station has allowed us to do is not just a lot of amazing science, but it's meant that for over 20 years, humans have had a permanent presence in space. Yeah. And it really hurt me to think that we're going to break that streak. Maybe I'm just too into my Duolingo and thinking about how much that would make me sad to lose my streak. But think about that. If we broke the streak of having humans in space, that'd be devastating. But of course, that's not the only space station that exists. Yeah. The China National Space Administration does have their Tiangong space station. Yeah. I don't know if it's always staffed currently. I think sometimes there's moments that it's empty, but it only launched a few years ago, so I could be incorrect on that. But their space station is super shiny. It's really beautiful in there. So at least we know that if maybe through international collaboration, we can talk them into making sure there's always someone on that space station, so we don't, as humans, lose our awesome streak, because we're gonna have to start all over again, and that would bum me out.
Yeah, these space stations aren't just, they aren't just doing science up there. They're going, and people are the idea is people will go and stay, just to go and stay, and they'll rent out. It'll be like a building where you can rent out different rooms and run your experiments on it. So it'll be pretty crazy. Someone asked, are you guys LA based? We're in Pasadena, California. So just gonna throw that out.
So
there.
It counts as LA County.
Yes.
But honestly, LA is practically, it's bigger than most states. It's ginormous. So
it's Airbnb in space.
Well, not most states.
Yeah, we don't hear a lot about the China station.
Well, I have wanted for a long time to try to connect with more people within that administration to tell more of these stories, because their space agency is doing such amazing things. I mean, the first lunar far side return, their mission to Mars, all of these things that they've got going on, but they're a little more difficult, a little more tight-lipped about their programs. They're a little more quiet about it. And I want to find a way to connect with them more deeply, because, we're based in the United States and most of our members are here, but we have members all around the world, many of which are in China. And we want to be able to celebrate the amazing things they're doing just as much as we're celebrating what the India Space Research Organization is doing and what they're doing in Canada and what they're doing in UAE. There's over 75 space agencies at this point.
Right.
So
let's do one more question. I'll give you the honors of the best one. The
best one. Could mammals reproduce in space?
Oh my gosh, I love talking about reproduction in space. That came out really strong. I am absolutely fascinated by reproduction in space, though. One of my favorite science experiments that happened recently was on Artemis 1. And it was Helga and Zohar, the female mannequins, because we do not know a lot about really that intense radiation in deep space, how that will affect the female body. Because if we're gonna settle Mars and we're gonna build this civilization on Mars, we can't do it without babies. And with females, we know on the ISS, based on experiments that they've done, that radiation harms the female body a lot worse than the male body, because we got a uterus and we got all this, reproductive organs. And so we don't know if females can, reproduce in space. We don't know. And that's what Helga and Zohar did. They kind of, took that, the dose of radiation, and kind of was able to calculate it. I haven't seen the paper you released on what it found.
I don't think it's released yet. I've been trying to talk to the people.
It's been way too long.
I know, but we do need to know more about that. And, as it stands right now, not to bring everything back to Jared Isaacman, but that second mission they sent up, Polaris Dawn, that was the furthest any woman has been from Earth.
Yeah.
Right. And so they were doing experiments on it. And I'm sure between that mission and what we saw with Artemis, maybe we'll have some more information on it, but we're far from knowing answers to these questions.
Yes. So mammals in space.
We've sent plenty of mammals up beyond just humans.
Yeah.
But I don't think, have the rats reproduced?
Yes, they have.
You act like you watched.
No, I'm trying to think if that paper is embargoed or not.
Yeah.
I think I talked about this in December, so I think it is
no longer embargoed.
I don't know. Yes, they have. Yes, they have, and they brought the babies back. The pregnant. Are they marsupials?
What?
Rodents. That is not a marsupial. They brought them back. The rats. I just remembered the paper. It has been released. Okay, so NASA had an experiment. They had rats pregnant in space. They brought the rats back to space. The rats had the babies, and the babies, you're up there, you are exposed to microgravity, to high radiation, to all of these things that just ruin your body. And when they had the babies were fine. But when those babies had babies, those babies were affected by what was done in the womb. Yeah. So if you don't know, when a woman is pregnant, and if she is pregnant with a girl, all of the eggs that the girl will ever have in order to, have a baby lives in the grandmother. So that means that whatever affects the grandmother also affects her grandchildren. So it's really interesting to talk about that kind of stuff, because what we're seeing is, if a woman is pregnant in space, her child might be okay, but her grandchildren might not be okay. And so we have to figure out how to set up generations on other planets, on other, space stations, whatever it might be.
That really goes to show you how little we know right now about the effect of the space environment on human biology or mammal biology, and how much more there's to discover. But
there's ethical considerations. Got to make sure we do it in a way.
Definitely. More discover in general, not just about sending people up to space to give birth to babies or whatever.
That's gonna be a really interesting, ethical conversation that hopefully happens. Hopefully it's a conversation. Hopefully there are laws and guidelines.
Yeah.
And
hopefully we don't live in like an Octavia Butler.
Novel. Yeah.
I know. I'm still flashing the Heinlein. Just
Octavia Butler, man. Those books scare me. But yeah, so there's a lot to learn about. If we're gonna be an interplanetary species, we got to figure out the reproduction aspect of it, because it's extraordinarily important.
I think
any last thoughts?
Oh, I think we've taken up everyone's time enough.
I think Pluto is a planet. Just kidding.
What? No.
But I do want to note that the 10-year anniversary of the flyby of Pluto is coming up on July 15th, I believe. So, if you want to have a moment to heart Pluto, that would be the time.
Aww.
We love Pluto.
Yeah, we'll make sure to mark it.
I just want to make sure. JAXA did a fertilized mouse babies. Yes, they did it first before NASA. Going to need to spend a lot more time in space and longer durations, even just to understand space environment effects to the cellular level and potential genetic effects. Absolutely. We walk around and let's do the whole part of it. Terrible. Yeah. No, we're not going to wear a lead suit. Even that's not going to help you against cosmic rays and microgravity.
That'd be heavy to launch into space, I tell you.
Yeah.
They mention plant growth. Yes, plant growth is extraordinarily stunted in on the ISS. They tried to grow a couple things, and they grew some very sad tomatoes.
Although I have heard that some of the seeds taken to space that then came down to Earth very much different from the situation with like living creatures because they were bombarded. The ones that did grow were like more. It's like they had overcome, right? But
interesting.
That's so interesting.
Not always the case.
Great. Well, we're going to say goodbye now. Thank you for joining us. I know that we need to do more of like a, beam it out onto social media before we go live. We kind of wanted to do this as a test to see if people would react to it and whether or not, because we all are kind of scattered around the United States. So it's very rare that we're all in the same building at the same time. But maybe we can do something in the same vein in the future. If this is something that you guys are interested in, we might just do the thing more often. And so thank you for everybody that, joined us, and we'll see you on the internet.
All right.
See you later.
See y'all around. See you in space.